And welcome. My name is Nigel Lewis and I'm a property journalist, and I'm here today to talk to Eddie Hooker, who is the Chief Executive of the HFIS Group, and we are going to chew the fat on some of the main topics facing the property industry and landlords today. And I believe the discussion was around the recent Supreme Court decision that came down in favour of a landlord and what was a superior landlord in a rent-to-rent repayment order case. Very difficult to say.
Absolutely.
What's your take on that? Do you think that therefore people who call for rent-to-rent to be better regulated are making a point, or is it never going to happen because it's just too difficult?
There's a lot of unknowns about the rent-to-rent market. I'm going to be very careful because the word murky could come up, and I want to make sure. And
there are lots of very good operators in this market.
Absolutely.
Who are completely above board.
There are some very, very good. But again, for the people watching this, what is rent-to-rent is where effectively an organisation or an individual rents a property from a landlord, on the pretence that they're going to live there. Generally, they're a company, but they then sublet it out without the original landlord, without the owning landlord being aware of it.
Although sometimes they are aware of it.
Of course they are. That's where the good
tends to be where the good lots are,
is where it's a proper agreement. All parties are aware, so the head landlord understands that the company or the organisation or the individual that is renting their property is not actually a tenant. It's a sub-landlord, if we can use that terminology, and that the property is going to be rented via the sub-landlord, not. And why rent-to-rents come up, and it's actually linked to what's called guaranteed rent. So a lot of landlords just want to know, I'm going to get my £1,000 a month. I don't care what you do with the property, just I want you to guarantee that £1,000. And what the rent-to-rent market does is to say, well, actually, we'll rent that property from you. We'll guarantee you the £1,000, and if we can't let it, or the tenant defaults, or the tenant goes, if the property goes void, I'll take the hit. I'll guarantee you the money. And then, of course, what I then do, if you're the head landlord, I will then charge a bit more rent than you would to the tenant. That's how I make my.
You rent out for $1,400.
Now, there's some really good organisations out there that do this very, very well. And actually, it's not an unsavoury practice. It's a very good practice. It's commercially viable for all parties. But you need to make sure that everyone is aware. Now,
assuming you know what you're doing.
So there are some courses out there. I'm not going to name names. That are proponents of the rent-to-rent market, but they're not giving the full story to would-be or unsuspecting landlords. But we won't go into it. That's again another story. So where does this court case come in? And this basically said is effectively there was a condition issue, obviously, and a rent repayment order was made.
They hadn't applied for an HMO license.
Hadn't applied for an HMO license, and then that triggered a rent repayment.
It did, a big
order,
one. 26.
And actually, the confusion of it, and I'm not going to go into the detail because we could be here all day. Was actually who was the landlord. That's where this.
Who pays the RRO to the tenant?
Effectively, they went after the head landlord, and the head landlord said, "Well, I don't know anything about this." And then there was the argument of should they, was the sub-landlord liable, and all of these sort of things. So the whole issue surrounded the rent-to-rent issue, and that there was a lack of transparency about who was the head landlord, who was the sub-landlord, who was responsible for repairs, who were responsible for licensing from an HMO. You with me? So I let my property to you as a big house.
Do I assume that you do the licensing, or do I have to do the licensing?
What happens if I don't know you've suddenly let it out to 4 families?
Instead of to the couple you were promising.
And so I think your question, rather than going into the intricacies of the case, was, do we need to do something more about rent-to-rent? Yes, I think we do. But of course, there is the part of the rent-to-rent market where the landlord doesn't know it's rent-to-rent. So I think there's probably an argument there about transparency, about checking, about referencing, about understanding who you are letting
and
your property.
Proposed property portal that is coming back to the
you're widening this now.
No, so to go sort of away from rent, but just to sort of say that it might have its head cut off a little bit, because if you go to a portal and go, there's my address, I'm going to rent this property,
You'll
that's the landlord, and who's this guy or woman who is renting it to me? That's going to sort of sort that one out.
Well, of course, you're then walking into a really
interesting area of policy.
Because rogues are not going to join up to the portal. No. So again, what you've got to be, and because we don't have a portal for owner occupied, so you can't turn around and say, well, the property's not on the rental portal. Is it on that portal?
Well, there's a land registry, but it's £2 a pop, and it's really hard to do it.
And land registry, it is very, very difficult. So you're never going to catch the rogues. And again, this is about enforcement. You need more resource on the floor. What happens if you discover that your property is sublet? How do you get that property back? Yeah,
almost impossible.
Absolutely,
as our friend will tell us.
Yeah. So again, I think if you're using a letting agent, ask questions. If you are a landlord, ask questions. If you're looking at tenants, make sure you get the proper referencing done, and that you ask your letting agent to make sure that they give you a background on the tenant, more than perhaps we've done in the past. Be actively involved in the property. That's another. If you do a biannual inspection and you turn up and say, well, I'm your landlord, I'm Mr. Hooker, and they go, I thought our landlord was Nigel Lewis, then suddenly that's alerting you to something. But these sort of areas are very, very difficult, but I do think we need to do something about it. What the final solution, without cutting off the good end of the market, because what you don't want to do is do something that cuts down everybody. It's really focusing on those areas of the market in every part of the private rented sector that deals with the rogues and deals with the people that ultimately are giving everyone else a bad name.